Welcome to Black Men Speak. I'm your co-host, the J.R. Stewart.
And I'm your co-host, the Tommy D. Duncan III, otherwise known as TD3 Jimmy. It is Wednesday, December the 6th, 2023. And if it's Wednesday night,
it's certainly Black Men Speak.
Yes,
So
sir.
let's give a shout out to Liquid for providing our theme music. And if you haven't already, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel. If you're here watching us live, invite a friend so you guys will have something meaningful to talk about for the rest of the week. With that being said, Tom, let's do what we do and let's just jump into our show because I know we have a full slate of topics to talk about.
Yeah, Jimmy, we are having to catch up on news from the last couple of weeks because, of course, we've had some great guests on our show. Of course, we had the Commissioner Brother Ed Gray on last week, and we've had a lot of great folks providing insight to our community. So now we've got to catch up on the news, Jimmy, and with it being the end of the year, it is a lot going on. But with all that being said, we're going to start with what we typically do at the beginning of our shows, and that is the birthdays, December birthdays. So let's get this party started right, Jimmy. We're going to go into our December birthdays. So you may be sharing a birthday with these folks if you are having a birthday within the next week. First, we're going to start off with a NBA basketball superstar, affectionately known as the Greek Freak, Giannis Antetokounmpo, super duper all-star for the Milwaukee Bucks. His birthday is actually today, December the 6th.
Okay. Congratulations. Happy birthday.
Absolutely. So happy birthday to him. Hopefully he is, I don't know if the Bucks are playing tonight, but hopefully if not, he's out there enjoying himself in his birthday someplace out there with family.
I know his team is doing well because I think they're in second place behind Boston in the standings.
Gotcha.
On the East.
All right. Next, Jimmy, one of my all-time favorite actors has a birthday on tomorrow, December the 7th. You may or may not know this guy, Jeffrey Wright, but this dude is a straight-up beast on the screen. He's been in some of my favorite films, Jimmy. He's actually been on Shaft. He's been on, what is this other show that I'm thinking out? Actually, it was a series that we talked about, Hunger Games. And he's also been in a couple of Marvel films as well.
Oh, he was also in Westworld.
Yeah. So, Jimmy, if you have not seen a film, or anyone watching, if you have not seen a film with this face, this name, Jeff Wright on it, do not die before you watch a good film with Jeff Wright on it. This guy is extremely sharp, brilliant in every film that he is in. Next, on December the 8th, journalist Joy Reid. You may know this face if you watch cable and you watch the news. Joy Wright has a birthday coming up in a couple of days as well. And this next face, Jim.
Well, happy birthday to the sister, even though her politics and my politics don't agree, but happy birthday anyway.
I understand.
I'm the bigger person because she wouldn't wish me happy birthday, I know.
Gotcha. This next adorable girl, when she was a little girl, is now all grown up, but she has a birthday coming up on December the 10th, Jimmy, Miss Raven Simone.
Yes, okay.
From the
Cosby Show and a couple other shows.
Exactly. She had the really we got to know her as a child on the Cosby Show, and I think she had a couple of other shows once she got a little bit older. But you know, this little adorable little face when she was a little girl is, I think, who America fell in love with on the Cosby Show. Next, for those of you who might be into entertainment, whether it's in a little bit of old school rap and or in acting, Mos Def, Jimmy, has a birthday coming up on December the 11th.
Okay.
Kind of unassuming brother, very, very talented as a musician, Jimmy, but also has a lot of roles, I would probably say supporting roles in a lot of films over the years. And so
a supporting role, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And host Def Poetry Jam for a while. Was it Poetry Jam or it was one of those Def Jams?
Exactly.
So yeah, they're talented brother, and certainly you've seen his work. So
exactly. And finally, on December the 12th, another great actress that I think we've all seen in some of our favorite films, Miss Regina Hall.
Yes.
Exactly. So she is actually a great actress, a great talent, has been in a lot of films over the years, and one of my fan favorites as well. So for those of you who have birthdays within the next week, happy birthday, enjoy yourselves. And we would ask that give us a shout out, and we'll give you a shout out on your birthday as well. And so those are our birthdays for the week, Jimmy. Next,
Well, actually, Tom, if I may, I want to interject
sure,
two things.
sure.
I want to make a couple of movie recommendations. I was hoping to have video clips to share tonight, but that somehow didn't work out. The first movie is called Almost Christmas.
Mhm.
It's streaming on Hulu. It's a black cast. I highly recommend. If you haven't seen it already, go out and watch it. And then the other one is Equalizer 3 with Denzel.
Oh, yeah. I forgot
Two
about
great
that.
movies. Highly recommend both of them.
Good deal. I heard that the Equalizer 3 movie was very good. And it's hard to get the third film right.
I thought the first one was good. The second one was just okay, but this one certainly is the best one to me.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Good deal. Good deal. Well,
It's worth seeing.
I've liked them on the first two, but I've heard, just from some of the feedback that the third one just started out action packed, and most people enjoy it.
Tom, it does. Very good movie.
Good deal. All right.
And you will like the scenes. If you like the first two, you are definitely going to enjoy the Equalizer 3. I mean, it is definitely a winner. So go out. I think it's streaming. It's maybe streaming now, some of the streaming channels. So if you didn't catch it on the big screen, watch it on the small screen through your streaming service.
Sounds good, Jimmy. Before we get into our stories for tonight, I want to give a couple of shout outs for folks who are on the chat line.
Who do we have?
Ms. Audrey K. Booker, good evening, cuz. Good to see you as always. Thank you for joining the show. Of course, our good friend and supporter, the brother Asar Al-Kabilan, also known as Uncle Asar, as well, of the African Genius podcast that focuses on everything Pan-African. So make sure that you look up African Genius podcast. And by the way, Jimmy, actually, brother Asar, who is also a classmate of mine, is going to be joining us in a couple of weeks on the show to talk about, what's going on, of course, on the African continent, some of the issues that we need to be aware of, and definitely looking forward to it. Also, he's going to talk a little bit about Kwanzaa. I think he actually has organized and produced several Kwanzaa festivals throughout the years, and he's going to talk a little bit about that and how we can celebrate that as well. So definitely looking forward to having Brother Asar on the show in a couple of weeks.
Looking forward to it. That's great news.
And as a surprise, Jimmy,
it gets even better.
Yeah, next week we're going to have Professor Freedom, who we have had on the show several times. Matter of fact, we had him at the end of our show last year to talk about Watch Night service, and he is one of our resident historians, Jimmy, and someone that always gets a great response to our shows. So next week, for those of you, Clarence Glover, who has been on our show, I think, at least 3 times before, has an event coming up, and we're looking forward to having him talk a little bit about what he has going on, talk about what's going to be coming up within our community affairs and some things that he is doing as well. So next 2 weeks, Jimmy, is going to be jam-packed, and then we'll, of course, that last Wednesday right before the end of the year, we'll leave that as a surprise for right now. So with that being said, Jimmy, before we get into our core stories, let's talk a little bit of sports. I mean, it's that time of the year, Jimmy. College football is now getting into the bowl season. The NFL is getting into the last quarter of its season. Basketball is in full swing. But Jimmy, first we're going to talk about college football and the CFP. Jimmy, there is a lot of talk going around about what happened this past week in terms of the four, and it really wasn't anything but one team in particular that had something to say about not being selected this time, Jimmy. So we've got to talk about some college football for a couple of minutes. So the question is, and we're waiting also not just to hear from what we have to say, but we would love to hear what our guests have to say. Did the College Football Playoff Committee get it right? A lot of people.
They got it right, Tom. They ended up in the right place. The path they took to get there wasn't exactly right. So I would say that Florida has every right. They did what they were supposed to do, which is win on the field.
We're talking Florida
So
State.
they have every right.
You're talking about Florida State, not Florida, right?
Yes, Florida State. Good. Thank you. They did everything right. They played on the field. They played who was in front of them, and they won out. So they certainly deserve to be in the talk. And generally, in any normal circumstance, they probably would have. But it's hard to overlook the winner of the SEC and not have them in the playoff time. I mean, I think the winner of the SEC has been in the playoff consideration for the last 11 years, probably since they started the playoff system. And I guess not having that winner in there would probably just equate to even a bigger argument. So the answer to this, is that we need to expand this out to 8 teams. You know, we can all agree on the top 8, who the top 8 should be, who they are. And if you have a question about the 7th and 8th team that got in, well, I mean, that's not that big of a discussion because there are probably 3 or 4 that can make an argument, and nobody's going to be disappointed about who number 7 and 8 is. But when you're talking about 4 teams, you know, it gets a little tighter, Tom. So I think I think they made the right decision. They got the right 4 teams in there, but probably the 4 best teams probably in football now. But Florida State certainly got cheated in the way that they did not get selected.
And this is what it looks like, folks. For those of you who have been following this, you already know what this looks like. But Michigan was ranked number 1, Washington 2, Alabama, who was number 8 before this past Sunday, has now moved up to number 4 after beating Georgia, who was the number 1 team.
Georgia was number 1, Tom,
until Alabama beat them this
They've been number 1 for 2 years.
And then for those in Texas, not named Aggies, Texas got in at number 3. They were not, and this is the interesting thing about it. Before this weekend, Georgia was number 1, Michigan was number 2. I believe Washington was number 3 or number 4.
No, Ohio State was number 3.
Ohio State was number 3.
Michigan was 2. Ohio State was number 3.
Gotcha. And then you have Florida State, which moved from number 4 to number 5. And then you had Georgia, who was actually the last 2 years national college football champion, moved from number 1 to number 6. And so this is ultimately how things shook out after the committee did its work this past Sunday. And the rub that most people had is that Florida State is the conference champion of the ACC, a Power 5. I believe it's Power 5 conference. They won out. They won all of their games. The challenge is they lost their Heisman candidate quarterback, I believe, 2 games before the end of the season. I believe he had a real bad ankle injury. I saw it. It was gruesome to look at, Jimmy. And in spite of that, they ended up putting in their second-string quarterback. He got injured with the concussion protocol. And so during the conference championship, they played Louisville with their third-string quarterback, who was a true freshman. And Jimmy, if I tell you that half the time that guy looked like a deer in the headlights with all that speed.
Yes.
He looked like a deer in the headlights. But Florida State has one of the best defenses in the country. And quite frankly, you know, they were able to eke it out, even though Louisville made it somewhat competitive until the very end of the game. But a lot of people said it's really unfair. It stinks that you have an ACC champion.
Life is not fair, so we need to get past its fairness.
Who was undefeated, and then they got
right. They're all undefeated, but there have been
not one.
There have been Big West. There have been Big West teams and Mountain West, like Boise State. You know, I mean, if they go undefeated, should they be in the playoffs?
But they're not a Power 5.
Know that.
They're not a Power 5, and then when you look at their strength of schedule,
right? But okay, but even on the Power 5, Tom, the ACC is called the Cupcake Conference for a reason. It's not the strongest football conference. Now, basketball is different, but football, they're not outside of maybe a Miami, Clemson every now and then. They're not the SEC. But let's just face and be real. And I mean, Texas beat Alabama when Alabama was number 2.
Yep.
Alabama beat Georgia when Georgia was number 1
Yep.
for 2 straight years.
Yep.
And so you can make an argument that Alabama deserved to move up and that Texas beating Alabama deserved to move up also because just by the fact that they beat Alabama and they won out also.
That's true.
And I'll be totally honest, Tom, I'm not sure at this point Florida State beat any of the top 4 teams that were put in with their situation.
Yeah,
they do have a strong defense.
That is a valid argument in terms of where they are right now. Where
they are right now. Now, if they had their quarterback, it would be different.
Yeah.
But where they are right now, just a strong defense and a quarterback, true freshman, that you reminded everyone, who looks like a deer in the headlight. Tom, they wouldn't survive Alabama. They wouldn't survive Texas. Texas has a great offense and a great defense. So they wouldn't survive Michigan. They wouldn't survive Washington. So, I mean, who could you match them up against where it'd be a good game? And so you have to factor that in. I mean, I know they won out on the field, so they deserve to be in the conversation. But let's just face it, without your quarterback, they are seriously hobbled.
Without your Heisman, well, he was the Heisman finalist until he got injured. But, Jimmy, this is the other thing. Florida State has one of the best defenses in the country. And, they were able to do that in spite of having a true freshman at quarterback. This is the rub, though. Alabama has a pretty doggone good defense as well, and that showed up against Georgia. Michigan has one of the better defenses in the country as well.
Ohio State.
And if you layer that on top of the fact that if you look at the quarterbacks for Alabama, who has improved tremendously since they got
Melrose has turned into a stud, Tom.
You look at
he was like
Texas.
That deer in the headlight at the beginning of the season, but he has matured into a stud now.
And the quarterback for Washington, Michael Penix Jr., he is actually the top candidate for the Heisman right now. And if you compare the quarterbacks for all of those teams to Florida State, yeah, it's kind of a challenge. And I think a lot of folks are very wary of seeing what happened last year with TCU, who just totally got obliterated in the national championship last year by Georgia. It wasn't even a competition after the first quarter, maybe.
Yes. And TCU was one of those teams that won out. They did what they're supposed to do also. And, they got exposed against Georgia. Hell, they even got exposed against Colorado this year.
Yes, they did. So it isn't fair. It's
not fair, Tom.
But
life is not fair.
The committee made a decision as to who they thought.
They got the 4 best teams, I believe.
And I think
the selection was correct.
And it's not who earned the right, which some people said Florida State earned the right to be in that top 4, but the committee said, who do we think are the best 4 teams? And they picked the best 4 teams. And it's hard to argue against those best 4 teams.
Well, Tom, like I said, if you expand this out to 8, I think, the first 4 would take care of itself. The top 6 would take care of itself. And we could argue about 7 and 8. And no matter who you pick for 7 and 8, it would be okay. I don't think nobody would be crying that they were cheated and deserve to be in the consideration and were not considered. So the answer to all of this, Tom, we need to at least expand it out to 18.
Well, the good news is, Jimmy, next year is going to be expanded out to 12.
Is it 12 or 8?
It's going to be 12 next year. So the first 4 teams are going to get a bye, and then the bottom
the next 8 are going to play each other,
and then they're going to collapse into those 4. And so it's actually going to be 12 teams, and so that's definitely going to answer all questions for the next.
Well, we can agree on the top 10 easily.
Oh, easy.
So 11 and 12 won't even matter because they'll just be bait for whoever's for the first and second seed.
And the unfortunate thing about it, Jimmy, is that college football fans have had to suffer for decades upon decades because every other sport, basketball, all the other football venues, high school and professional, practically every other sport, baseball has a true tournament, and football, which is by far probably, the most popular sport in the country now, used to be baseball. Now we've had to suffer because before it went to 4, it was just 2.
Well, Tom, before that, it was just sports writers decide. So we've come a long way. Anyway, Florida State, the kids there deserve some mention. And, you guys had a great season. But it just wasn't your turn this year, and I think the committee got it right. So
And
that being
everybody,
said, Tom,
every year somebody gets hosed.
yeah, somebody. So till we expand this thing out, that's the way it's going to be. So what's our next story, Tom?
All right,
I'm
Jimmy.
getting
Why don't
tongue tied
we're
here.
going to go to our next story. It's going to be about assessing Deion in year one. But before we get to that, let's acknowledge a couple of more guests who are on the chat line. Ms. Dominique Vinings is on the line. Good evening. Welcome, welcome. Ms. Celia Reese said,
Still in the
Equalizer
house.
3, yeah, Equalizer 3, definitely worth watching. Ms. Tanya Hall, good evening, of KGGR News. Brother Gregory Harrington, Florida State, he agrees should not be in there. Strength of schedule was too light compared to the SEC. Ms. Marion Square, hand pink waving, whatever that means. But welcome, Marion, to the show. And Brother Harrington is predicting that Michigan is going to beat Texas wait a minute. So if I'm understanding this correct, Michigan is number one and Alabama is number.
Yeah, they're gonna play. They play Alabama at 4, and then Texas.
Oh, he's predicting Michigan and Texas in the final.
Okay.
Yeah.
Roll Tide.
Hey, I'm not. It's going to be hard to vote against Alabama.
I wouldn't bet against Saban at this point. With a revigorated defense, Melrose playing great. I wouldn't count them out. So,
all right, I'm going to agree with you on that, Jimmy, because we know their defense and their quarterback is just heads and leaps better than what he was early this year when he got benched.
You know what, Tom? I never realized how tall and big Melrose. Till I saw him stand up next to someone giving an interview, and that guy's a beast. He's fast as hell, and he has an arm, and he's gotten a lot more accurate since the beginning of the season. So he's really matured into a stud of a quarterback. And I've just seen him that game against Georgia, man. They pulled out a miracle. So
he's a different dude. He's a different dude than what I saw. I remember watching him early this year. He's a different dude. And we have a Miss Black and Gold on here as well. I'm not exactly sure who Miss Black and Gold is or which one it is, but welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. And if you'll reveal yourself, that would be great as well. But we got a Miss Black and Gold on the line as well. So maybe we'll find out who that is as well.
Okay, what school?
All right, that's the question. I'm not exactly sure yet. All right, next, Jimmy, we're going to talk briefly about Deion. We're already 25 minutes in, but we have got to talk Deion for at least a couple of minutes. Jimmy, he has been really the talk of college sports. Let's just say sports, not even just college football, but sports this year, transitioning from Jackson State to his first year at Colorado, started out real fast, surprised some teams, TCU, Nebraska, and won I think 4 out of their first 5 or so games, Jimmy, and then kind of went on a decline. Jimmy got some injuries. Some of their best players got beat up. Shador, the star quarterback of the team, who was kind of a Heisman hopeful early in the league, Jimmy, he got beat up, Jimmy, and so I want to talk about what we learned this year from transitioning to Colorado. What impact, more importantly, do you think he had on the game this year? And I think that's the more interesting story.
Okay. When you go from winning 1 game to winning 4, to me, that's a 300 or 400% improvement over your previous record. So to me, they were already a success. And we're talking about a coach, Tom, that didn't have any scholarship players. So the players he had were all from the transfer portal. A lot of players left when he became coach, and so he's basically building a team out of nothing. Their offensive line is undersized. The defensive line is undersized. You can play with undersized linemen like TCU does because it gives you a sort of a speed advantage. But when you play bigger teams, Tom, they wear you down if they just stick to their running game and to their plan. And so that's what happened. TCU, Nebraska, some other victories they picked up along the way. They were basically able to outscore their opponents. And that worked for a while because they couldn't stop anybody. Their defense is just too undersized to stop anybody. So they basically their game plan was to just outscore you. Well, except that works until you run up against a team with a good defense.
Yep.
Who can slow you down, and you can't slow their defense down, and their defense is able to slow you down. So it's not a good combination. I expect more in the second year after he has a chance to do some recruiting, pick up some players. Some of the players you currently have now get a chance to mature. Hopefully, your linemen in the trenches get a little larger, and we'll see what happens next year. But I already think it's been a great success going from 1 win to 4 wins. And so next year I would expect them to win 7 wins, maybe get into a bowl game. And then after that, if we continue to recruit and get better, let's see what happens.
Well, Jimmy, I would agree with you in one aspect for sure, and that is going from a perennial doormat in the Pac-12 to not being relevant from a bowl competition and or conference champion perspective, but at least setting expectations. He absolutely was phenomenal in terms of lifting the visibility of the Colorado football program this year. They broke all kind of records in terms of attendance.
Oh yeah,
they had people
to attend for a change.
Right. I mean, he changed the culture of that, not just that football program, but of that campus as well, because Deion brings a certain swagger, Jimmy, to what he does. And I'm sure them folk in Colorado wasn't really ready for it, but they were so desperate that they needed something, anything to help uplift that program, and he definitely did. If you look at his approach to the game, there are a lot of folks who were not that appreciative of, in my opinions, Deion's Coach Prime's bravado, because he is a bit confident in himself. And he's always been that is who he is, and that is his personality.
That's just who he is. And
exactly.
You know what? I'm okay with that. I'm okay that if you're going to talk it, you need to walk it. So his walk got a little shaky down the stretch, but just fine. He had to take back some. He had to humble himself a little bit, and that's okay. Because here's the thing, Tom, is that you expect coaches to expect their teams to win.
Yes.
And when you step out on that field, every time you go to play, you should be going out to the play to win. And there's nothing wrong with a coach speaking highly of himself, of his team, and saying, hey, we're going to win, we're going to do this. Okay, if you come up short, that's still fine. I still expect the coach to do everything possible to put a winning product on the field. And, Tom, there have been some talks now, some rumors about Coach Prime going to your alma mater.
That's not going to happen. Texas A&M has already hired their new coach, so that's a done deal. So that's not going to happen.
Done deal, okay.
Yeah.
By the way, who they pick up?
Some guy.
University of Houston coach?
No, he did not. I'll have to go back. I'll think of the name of the team that he picked him up, but it was kind of someone that is maybe an up and coming, has been in the system for a while, but not anyone that you would recognize, because quite frankly, I didn't even recognize, his name when he came up. But, they have already picked up their new coach. I know that there were some rumblings about that, him coming back to Texas. But that's a done deal.
Yeah, Coach Prime, Tom, you're going from 1 victory to 4 victories. To me, that always makes you a winner. So no matter what happened this season, and especially be able to do that, bringing a few players from your old school that you coach, but all your players coming through the transfer portal. I'm sorry, Coach, transport. The transfer portal, with no scholarships, Tom, and pretty much having to rebuild a team from scratch. Yeah, at the Division I level, that's a tough sell. So
Mike Elko, the coach that Texas A&M pick up was Mike Elko from Duke. He was the head coach at Duke.
Yeah, Tom, that's not going to be much of an improvement. It's not like Duke lit it up in the ACC.
No.
So okay. Well,
but Jimmy, I went to Texas A&M. I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised.
Yeah, you would have been better off with Coach Prime. I'm sorry. I know Duke is decent, but they're not exactly competing for national championship. And a school like A&M,
they're not even competing for conference championship.
No, they're not, Tom. And I was even surprised when the quarterback got drafted by the Giants. And like, what are y'all thinking about going to Duke to pick up a
Daniel
quarterback?
Jones. Yeah, Daniel Jones.
So, so I'm going to give Coach Prime a B+ for what he's accomplished this year, and I think the true grades are going to come next year. I fully expect him to be able to win at least 7 games
Get
and
to a
get into
bowl
a
game.
bowl, and then after that, the next 2 years, 3 years after that, I fully expect them to at least be in a top 10, top 20 program in the nation and competing. It'd be very
If he
competitive.
stays there long enough, Jimmy, if somebody doesn't lure him away with more money.
Well, that's a possibility, Tom. If they win 7 games next year, yeah, it may be difficult to keep him there. But I hope he stays there and builds something, build a legacy there, and because we need the doors open for other black coaches to do the same and be considered. And I think if he could build a program someplace and show what black coaches can do, then that'll open the door for others, as opposed to him going through every open door that opens up for a black coach.
You think he might be able to get Eddie George a job someplace? You know, Eddie, he's at what is it, Tennessee State. Jimmy, I think Prime is just a unique asset. I don't see the portals all of a sudden opening for black coaches in NCAA D1 coaches. I would be surprised. I would love to see that happen. I just, for whatever reason, don't see it happening. It ain't happening in the NFL. I don't see it happening in the NCAA anytime soon.
Tom, the NFL is another beast. So we've talked about that good old boys club.
And
That's pretty much not going to happen. So
yeah,
not for a while. It may happen one day, but it's not for a while.
But I will say this: props, even though we're not going to talk about it, to D'Amico Ryan at the Houston Texans, because Jimmy, they are truly on the come up.
They rocking and rolling down there.
Exactly. First season,
the young quarterback is getting the job done. So, yeah,
CJ Stroud. So shout out to him. He's doing great in his first season. Houston has been a doormat, and they are knocking on the door of possibly winning the division.
And no one expected them to do anything. So to go from doormat to competing is a good thing. So. Even though we have this in-state rivalry between Dallas and Houston, I still wish them much luck on what they're doing. So,
and I'm really rooting for the head coach and CJ Stroud as well.
Yes.
All right, Jimmy, let's go ahead and go to our other stories, and we're going to go ahead and run through this, Jimmy. Starting out with a couple of interesting stories that we actually covered a while back. First, we talked about the story of Atatiana Jefferson, who unfortunately was there was a police call to her home where her and her nephew were in the house. I think playing some games very late into the morning. I think it was around 2 a.m. And they had the door open, and unfortunately, she was shot and killed by a law enforcement officer. Well, the city of Fort Worth has just awarded her nephew, who was there with her, $3.5 million to be put into a trust to take care of him. Mr. Zion Carr, this is the young man here. At the time, he was 8 years old when this incident happened, and obviously, the officer who went to court over this, I believe, was given maybe 11 years for manslaughter on this one. But it looks like there was a judgment in favor of the young man, the nephew Zion Carter, for this. So, this is devastating. No amount of money can probably take the place of Aunt Jimmy. But this is something that we had talked about before and wanted to provide an update because this just happened in the past week. And, of course, this is in our backyard as well.
Right, well, in Fort Worth. So, Tom, let me say this. This is why this is very important. Tom, we have to teach our people, and we shouldn't have to do this, but we need to do it, how to de-escalate when it comes to the police. Because if they discharge their weapon and we end up dead, I mean, whether justice is served on an officer or not, it's getting better, but it used to be officers would shoot people and there was pretty much no judgment against them. And so at least some of these officers are starting to find their way into prisons after the shooting, but you're still dead. And they'll get out of prison one day and get on with their life. And like you said, no amount of money is going to compensate for a person's life. So we need to be very careful when it comes to the police and do our absolute best to de-escalate situation so it doesn't turn fatal. Because generally, Tom, we're on the losing end of that battle, and I
That
hate
is
to
a
see
very
anyone die for over something like this, which is for no reason whatsoever.
that's a very good point, Jimmy. But unfortunately, in this case, there was no room for de-escalation because the officer literally
Right,
shot
he
into
shot
the house.
into that is true.
She is trying to protect her nephew because she hears something at 2 a.m. in the morning around her house, and then the officer shoots into her house. There is no, ma'am, is everything okay?
Not in this
She
situation, Tom, but in
exactly,
other like traffic stops and other situations, if you have a chance to de-escalate, do everything possible to de-escalate the situation so it doesn't turn fatal. But in this particular case, you're right; she didn't have a chance, and she was
no,
simply trying to protect her nephew.
exactly. And this young man will be traumatized for the rest of his life. We just hope that his family. Obviously, I presume he's probably going through some counseling how to deal with this. Nothing is going to bring his aunt back or take away the trauma of what he has experienced. This is just a bad situation where some law enforcement officer, probably scared, goes there, shoots first, and then asks questions later, and he gets 10 years, and she loses her life, and this nephew loses his aunt. So. I can't say that this is justice, but this is definitely some term
No,
of.
Tom, it's not justice. I mean, we're not going to tiptoe around this. It's not. There's no justice at all involved in this story. So, um, and certainly, I mean, when a life is taken like that for an innocent person, um, there is no justice. There's nothing you can do in return. Even if you take the life of the other person, there's still justice is not served because there's so many other people that are involved in the situation whose lives are now destroyed or impacted.
And this just goes to show, and one of the things that we've been talking about for the last several years during George Floyd and after he was murdered by Derek Chauvin. And by the way, we're not going to talk about that tonight, but we can talk about it later. His incident in prison recently, but the way that law enforcement handles Black and brown communities as opposed to wealthier white communities is diametrically different. And so unfortunately, some folks get the benefit of the doubt while some folks get policed and or handled. And that is
Yeah.
part of the narrative of what has been discussed in terms of training. But it really has, I think, to do with more than just training. It has to do with the culture that we are dealing with. And quite frankly, until you get, and we've talked about this, more folks from our communities involved and engaged in law enforcement, not just from a citizen standpoint, but actually officers, sheriffs, police chiefs who know the community, who know the people. So we'll have less incidents like this because you actually know
Well,
the
Tom,
people.
it's just going to take some common sense and better training. And I'm not sure if an officer who's afraid for his or her life that their color is going to matter that much because
It
the,
does.
the training information shows that it doesn't. When they go through those simulation tests of how and they measure how quickly they pull a trigger on the good guy versus the bad guy on the test, the numbers are exactly the same regardless of color. So I'm not convinced that it's going to make that much of a difference. What's needed is better training. If someone had just called this lady when the officers got there and told her to come outside, or put her in contact with the operator, stay on. A lot of times, the operator will stay on the phone with you until the officer. Do you see the lights outside? If you see the lights outside, go outside and greet and meet the officers. Common sense approaches. I don't know what happened in this situation when the officers get there. Why she and the nephew didn't come outside. I don't know if they didn't see the light. Why this officer shooting into an open door because he sees something inside is dark.
It is her house.
It's
It's
poor
her house.
training. I mean, it just represents poor training and a lack of common sense. And this lady lost her life as a result of it. And
She
it
did
didn't
nothing
have to
wrong.
be that way.
And she
So,
did nothing wrong. She's trying to, you have a right to protect your household and your family. And she didn't shoot. She did not shoot.
that's correct, Tom. So what I'm saying is just better training, some common sense approaches. That maybe this could have been avoided, but I think more than anything, that's what's needed is just some common sense approaches to how to do this. Better training, so these things don't. I hope, if nothing else, that the city of Fort Worth learned from this, and other law enforcement officers learned from this whole experience and have made changes to keep this from happening again?
I don't think anything is going to change until diplomatic immunity is gone away, and they will literally. And obviously, some officers, when they've done the wrong thing, they have had to deal with prison time. But until they become less immune to those who take advantage of their badge, it's going to continue to happen.
Okay. And what do you have for our next story, T?
Next story. This is also a follow-up. We talked about this before. Former FedEx driver who was shot at while he was working in his FedEx truck.
Yeah. Not funny. I'm sorry. Just the visualization of it, kind of got me laughing. But it's not funny when someone's shooting at you. I mean, you could have lost his life. So.
And this is what you call, working while black. And this guy is on his traditional route, driving his FedEx truck, gets shot at because someone thinks that he's fishing while he's in his work truck, not in his private vehicle. And these two guys shoot at him, and it was just a mess. The fortunate thing is that in this case, Jimmy, he wasn't shot, killed, and we're talking about his family having to deal with the consequences. But he filed a lawsuit, and his first name is a little bit confusing. DeMontario Gibson filed an initial lawsuit, and I believe it was thrown out because of a technicality, because I think one of the law enforcement officers didn't provide some evidence that he should have, and so it was thrown out. And so now he is filing a second lawsuit for $5 million against FedEx, who eventually fired him from FedEx, in addition, I think, to the two men who ended up shooting at him as well. And so he is now filing a second lawsuit to the sum of $5 million to get some redress for what happened. Because after he was shot at, after he reported the incident, he was told to go back and take the same route.
Yeah, they have to change their route. There's no way I'm going back on that route after I've been shot at. So that just wouldn't happen. I'd give you the keys, the packages, and the truck back if that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely crazy that his supervisor told him to take the same route that he had gotten shot at before. And so all that being said, he is suing his former employer. He is suing those who shot at him. Hopefully,
I wish him luck. I hope the jury awards him that plus some. To send a message to, and this is where common sense, Tom, needs to prevail once again. This is just stupid. Person been shot at, you're going to put him on the same route. Change the route, put him, hopefully in a safer neighborhood, or a different neighborhood where, people are not prone to take shots at FedEx drivers.
Yeah, Jimmy. So we definitely wish him the best of luck in his lawsuit. We will continue to track this as we do with our story. Next story, Jimmy. A New York man who has been in prison 25 years just recently exonerated and released from prison. Just an amazing story. And I don't know that we covered this one because I think
we haven't covered this one, Tom. But you know what I was going to say? His story is not unlike many others, Tom. And when we ever have to report these stories, it's either going to be an eyewitness who recanted or DNA that prove the innocence of the person. But all too often, this happens to too many of our men. And generally, at the root of these stories is an identification by a white woman that's faulty most of the time. And so I'm going to say for black men, be very careful when you're dealing with or in a situation where there's a white woman who's testifying against you for a crime, because there's a very good chance that you're going to be convicted, even though all the other evidence is going to point to your innocence. The testimony of a white woman against you is so overwhelming to a jury that these stories happen routinely, Tom. It's not the first time we reported on a black man being released. I mean, and generally, it's 20, 30 years before they get out of jail, Tom. It's not like they served 30 days in the county jail and got out and were able to get on with their life. I can't even fathom how do you get on with your life after 25 years of being locked up wrongly. And you've had a jury, your peers supposedly, who convicted you in a system that allowed this to happen. And it took this long for the system to correct itself.
Jimmy, you're correct, because actually he was convicted in 1998 of murdering two men who were found there in a car in Harlem. You know, it speaks to the fact that he didn't have good representation, which means obviously he probably wasn't making a lot of money. And he was serving 2 consecutive sentences of 25 years to life in prison for a murder and hire case. And so, again, based upon some new evidence, and I believe this, Jimmy, may have been one of those cases where the Innocence Project came to his aid, did some additional research, and was able to get him off.
If I'm not mistaken, the Innocence Project is a law professor from the University of Michigan.
Okay.
And he heads that up. And I believe they have student attorneys, law students around the country who work with him. And so they've done some great work, Tom. In fact, most of these cases that we read about and talk about like this have been as a result of the Innocent Project working on the release of freeing these men. I didn't realize, Tom, that a lot of these cases, they have DNA cases, test kits that haven't been tested. You know, they 20, 30 years behind just on testing the kits. And once they actually get them tested, they actually determine that some of the people you convicted were actually innocent of the crime. You know, you could have done something as simple as gotten the DNA tested, to the test kit sent out to the lab and had it tested to either prove the guilt or the innocence of the person. And, you know, we even had that case, that situation here in Dallas, where the former DA, what was his name? I think District Attorney Craig, who had a bunch of
Craig Watkins. I know Craig, I've been knowing Craig Watkins since.
Only to find out you got about 20, 30 people sitting up in prison, and the DNA evidence proved that they were innocent. So Tom,
they were not too happy at all. The good folks in Dallas were not too happy when he started releasing.
Oh no, they were not happy, Tom. I think he lost a re-election as a result of that. You know, because they told him his job was to put people in jail, not to be getting people out of jail. So, yeah, but the system should do everything possible when you take away someone's freedom to make absolutely sure that every rock has been uncovered, Tom, that everything possible has been done to either prove your guilt or prove your innocence.
Yeah. So you can't get back 25 years of your life. Jimmy,
you can't get back 25 days, Tom.
Imagine this. Losing 25, just erasing the last 25 years of your life, Jimmy. That is traumatic for something you did not do. I can't imagine.
I hope, and a lot of times, Tom, you know, the other unfortunate thing is before they let these people out of prison, they generally sign some waiver to basically say they're not going to sue the state, so they can't sue. But I hope the New York legislature, introduce a bill to compensate this man for the last 25 years of his life, no matter what he may have signed in order to get out of jail.
So, you know, we've talked about this before, Jimmy. So when he comes out, you can't just kind of say on a job application, well, you kind of got a 25-year gap, sir. We know you're looking for.
What have you been doing for the last 25 years?
Exactly. So, you know, the good news is there are some great stories of brothers and sisters who come out, become entrepreneurs and done very well for themselves. There are a lot of programs out there for those who have been convicted before, because they don't get a fair shake, even if they have been so-called rehabilitated in the so-called correction system. Folks don't really give them the benefit of the doubt.
Well, Tom, there's nothing to rehabilitate here because he didn't do anything wrong. So
right.
I hope the state of New York compensates him for the 25 years they took away from him.
I would agree, Jimmy. So we will now move forward to our next story, and we will now go into a couple of interesting international stories. We'll start off with one that's kind of fun and interesting, Jimmy. A lady in Uganda became, I think, maybe what has been determined as maybe the oldest mother in Africa now.
Tom, I couldn't believe the story when you told. I couldn't believe it. 70 years old, Tom.
70 years old.
And you said she has twins?
She had twins. Of course, she went through in vitro fertilization. Her name is Safina Namukwaya. and she gave birth to a boy and a girl on
Wow.
November the 29th. Went through in vitro fertilization, and she was, I guess, not able to have children when she was younger. And so I don't know if the technology just became available there. I would think not, because in vitro has been around for a little while, but she just at 70, the young age of 70 years old, just had twins.
Congratulations to her and her husband. And man, but that's a remarkable story, Tom.
It is. It is. I mean, all that said, we going back to biblical stuff, steroid. But for those of you who remember the
That's
story,
Abraham and Sarah, you having children late in life. You're a couple hundred years old, still having children.
Jimmy, can you imagine having to run around and chase kids at that age? I can't.
I can't either, Tom. So,
All right, let's get into a couple of more stories as well, more serious stories. And we have been tracking a lot of what has been going on in Haiti more recently, of course, in particular, not just with the state of affairs there, but also, of course, with the murder of their former president, Jovenel Moïse. And it looks like one gentleman who is, I guess, identified as a former DEA informant has now pled guilty to being an accessory to his crime. Joseph Vincent, a former informant of the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, became the fourth person to plead guilty in a U.S. court for his role in the 2021 assassination of Haiti's president. And literally, the country has fallen into a state of further decay because, of course, as we've been reporting, the central government pretty much is non-existent. They have a prime minister who I'm not exactly sure what he's doing, but they have no operating judicial system. They have no operating Congress. Jim, and I think 11 people were ultimately arrested at some point in time in terms of the possibility of being involved with the murder of the president there. But it is a bad situation there for
well,
the
you keep
people.
moving on the strings, Tom. You're going to find more government involvement. And I think eventually it's going to end up with the CIA.
Absolutely, Jimmy. I mean, think about this. This is an in-house deal. You have folks from Colombia, mercenaries, politicians, business people who are involved in the murder of a president, a head of state. And you know that the United States, the CIA in particular, knows everything that is going on around the world. And so you can't say, Jimmy, that they knew absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing.
I agree, Tom.
About what's going on. I'm not saying implications, but knew absolutely nothing. They knew what was going on with every high-profile murder probably on the face of the earth. And it's just unfortunate that the U.S., France, who colonized Haiti, continue to destabilize the country, that when they get a president, a head of state, who actually is trying to do something to support the people, even though initially I think he was supported by the U.S. government. Things sometimes change. And then all of a sudden, he's gone. Kind of like when Muammar Gaddafi out of Libya decides that we need a unified Africa, all of a sudden he's gone. It just never fails.
Well, Tom, anytime you're talking about unification or people coming together and challenging the power structure, there's always going to be a problem. So you have to be careful when you do that. You pretty much have to be a lamb on the world stage and not step on the toes of anyone who's more powerful than you, especially when you're dealing with the U.S.
And with that being said, I'd like to go to our next story, because a couple of countries that we've been keeping our eye on, Burkina Faso in particular, Niger, and Mali, probably to a lesser degree, have recently decided to create a confederation as a part of unifying themselves as West African countries, all of which were pretty much the puppets of the French government.
Right.
And they have owned at least those three countries, and I believe Gabon, maybe a couple of other countries, have taken over their own government and decided to distance themselves from the control of the French government,
Yes,
Jimmy. And I think that it is an interesting story that we need to continue to watch, because I think what we see going on in West Africa is long overdue for the people of the
It
country.
is,
As we
Tom.
know, Jimmy, most of the resources, the mineral wealth, the gold, oil, depending on what part of the continent you're on, all the resources, I believe, statistically speaking, Africa has 50% of the reserves of the natural minerals on the earth. And so it makes sense that the so-called Western countries want to maintain control over that. But it looks like, these folks have a different idea and they want to control their own destiny. They don't want to continue to be controlled by other countries.
Well, Tom, they're going to have to come together to do that and pool their resources. But on top of that, we've talked about this before. The African countries have to get into the processing business. You can't be the producer of raw material and which you export, and then you buy and back refined products from the Western world. So you have to get into the processing business and start processing some of the minerals and the the things that you have into products that the world needs. So we're starting to see that, Tom, the coming together, the easing of travel restrictions between African countries. Hopefully they can continue to work together. It would be even nice if they come together with a unified currency, Tom, to trade with. That would really blow the continent up. So we're going to continue to pray for our brothers and sisters in Africa, that they continue to be led to do the right thing, and that they continue to develop and evolve along those lines, Tom.
And Jimmy, when that does happen, I mean, that sends a message to the world. Maybe not the right message to France or Spain or the United Kingdom or the Dutch, or all those countries who colonized them and basically exploited them for all their natural resources. But the message that they're sending internally to the other 50 some odd countries in the continent of Africa, but also the message they sent to Africans in diaspora. That meaning the United States, that meaning South America, that meaning the Caribbean, in terms of controlling their own destiny and not waiting on other countries that do not have their interests in mind to tell them what and when to do and how to do it.
Well, Tom, if you need evidence of this, go out to Google, and I believe the camera on the space station has a camera that points towards towards Earth. So there's images there. You can see globally what the world looks like. And look at the Western world, look at the Eastern Asian countries, even look at Central and South America at night when the lights are on. And then compare that to Africa with how many lights they have on. Africa, Tom, is pretty much dark. There's a spot here, there's a light there that represents a city that has city lights. The rest of the world is lit up at night. Africa, there's a speck here and a speck there. And so if you haven't been friendly enough of a friend to help me develop an infrastructure so I can turn lights on, there's no way in the world, Tom, that Africa can catch up with any other continent if you don't have energy. And when I'm giving you money not to produce energy, that's going to keep you in the dark. You can only cut down so many trees and light so many candles to get by. But the reality is that you need power to run factories, to run cities, to advance your culture. And the Western powers have conspired to keep energy away from Africa. They don't mind taking the energy and raw material, sucking it out of the country. But as far as allowing you to process it and develop your own power infrastructure, no, Tom, the UN is guilty of that. And the Western powers that fund the UN are guilty of that. So, climate issues only become, Africa has to pay the price for everyone else wanting to become climate conscious. When everybody like China, for instance. China is building a coal plant every week to keep up with their energy demands. And they don't care about how polluted the air is because of those coal plants. But somehow Africa can't build a coal plant, can't build an electrical plant.
But to your point, Jimmy, they are these deals that are being made with what I would consider to be some of the heads of states of some of the African countries. That's the reason that they're getting elected, because their elections are being funded by the Western countries so that they would continue to, number one, give away Africa's resources and make sure that they don't have the infrastructure in terms of energy resources.
Pennies are what it's worth.
Exactly. And so that's why I find our last article very interesting, because I just saw an article that Burkina Faso, that is now being run by military captain and President Ibrahim Traore, is now building its first gold refinery in country with the support with a Malian businessman. And Jimmy, they are expected to produce and refine up to 400 kilograms of gold per day, equating to approximately 150 tons per year over an area of 5 hectares. And so, again, this is a small step for Burkina Faso.
It is a
But
small step, Tom, but I hope they take that. Well, I'm not happy about the military being in charge, but I hope they continue to build on that
yes,
success, Tom, because we've been calling for more of that for Africa. That the African countries have to do more to refine the raw resources that they have.
that's the only answer. That is the only,
It
and that
is.
is why China has so much power, is because it is able to produce for its own. They're able to mimic and copy practically anything that can be produced. And Africa is the wealthiest country on the earth, yet the people are the poorest by far when you look at the entire landmass. And so I think this is exciting news. It's great news. I hope Burkina Faso.
What's the start?
Exactly. It is a start, and hopefully other countries will take suit and look at what they're doing and begin to do the same, as opposed to taking all of their mineral wealth, all of their money, all of their IP, giving it to other countries to sell it back to them at a 10, 20, 100x premium that they can't afford to pay.
Can't afford it, Tom. In the aid that's provided is always given in the form of loans that you can't afford to pay back. You become so indebted to the powerful countries that they pretty much control you at that point. And so it's hard to say no when you owe them money and you need them to subsidize you. So the best thing is to start breaking away to free your countries, which is starting to happen, especially with a lot of countries that were controlled by the French. But the next step is to loosen up travel restrictions and start refining your own resources and sell them on the open market, as opposed to buying back refined products.
Exactly. And that is exactly what Burkina Faso is planning to do.
So, okay, Tom. Well,
That's
do
it
we have
for
any
now.
more stories, or did we make it through?
That is it, Jimmy. We're right a couple of
I
minutes
told
past
you we
the
were
hour.
going to make it through, man. Are you a little worried there?
So, Jimmy, again, great show. We'll be looking forward to next week, where we have Professor Clarence Glover to join us next week. Always exciting show. And we thank everybody for joining us tonight. We thank all of our folks on the chat line. We thank you for continuing to support us. And we will look forward to seeing you next week.
We'll see you guys next week.
Good night.